Hey there, minions. I'm Jim Price.
I'm Sarah Traeger.
And I'm Eric. This is Crank It Up, the official, unofficial fan podcast of Smash Up.
Welcome to our first episode, where we'll tell you all the things you need to know about Smash Up and even a few things you never thought you knew.
On today's episode, we're going to have an interview with Todd Rowland, the director of AEG, the publisher for Smash Up, and we're also going to preview some of the new cards from the That 70s expansion, which is coming out soon.
But before we get started, let's talk about Crank It Up. What's up with the name? Where do we get the name from?
That's a great question, Eric. And we invite you, the audience, to try and answer it. If you go to our Facebook page at Crank It Up Podcast, we'll have a question for you about the origin of Crank It Up. Here's a hint. It has something to do with Smash Up. If you could figure it out, private message us by March 1st, and if you're correct, we'll randomly enter you into a contest to receive a free Smash Up promotional item.
That sounds fantastic. Let's crank it up.
Before we get to the show, we thought you'd want an opportunity to get to know your hosts. We're fans of the game, and we're here to help promote it because we like it so much.
But our opinions are our own, and we will always strive to remain objective.
So, we're going to tell you all of our bias. For example, Jim over here doesn't like Munchkins so much that I have never played with Munchkins because I don't actually own Smash Up. I do own the All-Stars, though, because they rock.
Not the biggest fan of Madness either.
Yeah.
I like madness.
We all like a little madness. So we're going to ask some icebreaker questions to really get to know us and our personalities. So I proposed a couple questions to these guys and gals, that we're going to answer. The first one being, the Big in Japan had a new mechanic called Titans. So the question I'm asking is, if you were a Titan from one of the factions that's already out, which faction would you be, and what would your talents and abilities be?
Well, I would go with the superhero faction, and I'd have two abilities, because most Titans have two abilities. My ongoing ability would be each time you play a minion of power 5 or more, place a minion of power 2 or less from your discard pile into your hand, because it'd be a good way of getting back the mild-mannered citizens. And my talent would be choose minion or action and reveal the top card of your deck. If you are correct, draw it, because the superheroes could use a little bit of card draw.
I'm kind of going to put you on the spot because I didn't ask you this, but what would be your Titan's name?
The man in the chair.
The man in the chair.
Yeah, the guy behind the scenes who's coordinating everything. The man in the chair.
Nice. It almost sounds like a Lex Luthor aspect to it.
Lex Luthor is my hero.
Okay, well, I would have to be the Titan for the geek factions, I think, because that is probably the one that most closely aligns with my true personality. Not super excited to admit to that, but I think it's accurate. So what I thought of for mine is a little bit meta, but I think that what I would do is would be a talent, and it would be that you could get a +1 counter for each game in the current play space that you can teach without referencing a rulebook. So you look around the area where you're actually playing the game of Smash Up, and if there's a bunch of games there that you know how to play and you could teach people without having to actually look at the rules or look anything up, then you would get +1 counters for each of those that you could, and you could distribute those amongst your minions to get extra power. I did this because I'm a professional demonstrator. I actually teach people how to play games, which is amazing. And so I kind of wanted to reflect who I feel that I am. I think it could be a little bit overpowered, though, so there maybe needs to be a limit on how many counters we could actually put out.
And how do you validate that you can teach a game? Like, you suddenly pause this game and you go through and you teach every other game?
I think if you're playing with people who wouldn't accept, hey, I can teach all of these games, then you would probably have to give, quick overviews of each one. If people really wanted to be rules lawyery about it, this could take quite a bit of time.
I think the bigger question is Smash Up one of those games? Because there are several card clarifications for obscure scenarios.
That's true.
So you wouldn't be able to count Smash Up itself?
Probably not, no.
I'm not sure I could do that 100% of the time.
So what about your Titan name?
Ooh. Oh, I don't know. Well, I am the settler of Catan, mayor of Machikoro, and the short version of that is Sock Mom. So maybe it'd be Sock Mom.
Sock Mom.
Sock Mom, the Geek Titan.
Okay, what about the GM? Or the Game Master?
Oh, I like that.
I think that'd be a pretty cool.
Yeah, I like that
be
better.
Right on line with the rest of the geeks.
Yeah.
Very cool. So mine was the Tricksters because I just like shenanigans. So my ongoing ability was a little bit on the OP side as well. While this Titan is in play, you never have to discard cards. So you won't be limited by the 10 card faction. However, say your Titan gets pushed off, you suddenly have to like discard down. So you might have like this awesome hand, and then suddenly like they're like, okay, we got to get that Titan out of here because he's ridiculous. And then they could just like make me discard half my cards. It would have to be at the end of my next turn.
Yeah, at the end of your turn.
The talent would be choose a minion on this base. That owner must discard a copy of that minion or reveal their hand to show that they don't have it. So it kind of gives you kind of a meta. You get to find out what people have.
Everybody discard cards but you.
Yeah, and everybody has to discard. So it can be very painful. Card to be
Eric
out
likes
there.
to inflict pain.
Yes. And the idea for that actually came from I like doing puns. So like just saying cards, yeah, you can cut to Jim just shaking his head, just looking at me like nope. So I kind of think of it as like giving someone a pun when you're telling them it's this card and they have to show you another card just like it, and you have to discard it. It's kind
I
of
could see that.
a tricky little pun there. And then the Titan name would be the Punchster. And Jim dies a little bit. So the next question is, they're coming out with that 70 expansion. What if they came out with that 90s expansion? What would be a required faction that has to be in there, and say a minion or an action? Just take your pick.
So for about 4 hours of my life, it seemed, Pogs were a really big thing. By the time I started buying them, no one was playing them anymore, but it still made a big impression on me. Pogs are those little coin-like things that you use to flip over other Pogs, and you had strikers and little 8-balls, and I think that would make a great faction if you could flip and unflip cards, if you could take over other people's cards, because that's what you would do with Pogs. You'd steal them from other players. I think that absolutely needs to be in that 90s expansion.
I have to say, I loved the 90s, and one of the things I loved about the 90s was all of the different toys, especially my Tamagotchi. It took me forever to convince my parents to let me have one, but I finally got one, and then it was just constantly taking care of it all the time. And you may or may not remember that if you ever had one, but I think it would be cool to have a Tamagotchi faction with a lot of lower powered minions that need constant attention, or they get sent to the discard pile.
Very nice. So mine was one aspect of the 90s that I hated and despised, but it left us very...
You're just wrong. Everything about the 90s was amazing.
Okay. Well, you'll see in a minute. It was, I would call it the boy band faction. And so...
Like I said, amazing.
You'll have one group where like a bunch of like minions that harmonize together and work together, a lot of synergies with their talents, kind of like the magical girls, and then they would all have to be like in sync together. There you go, Jim.
So there should be 5 of them because most boy bands have an average size of 5.
Right.
So maybe 5 6-power minions.
Yeah, I was thinking like I didn't know if they want to be like 1 5-power minion or just be like 5 characters on that one.
I like 5
for the
separate
5 art,
ones.
but the 5 separate ones
Yeah.
would sound really interesting, and like maybe kind of like how I think it's the magical girls where they have the small little minion that can pull out another minion, but kind of maybe more like the locals where you play this one, look for your top 3. If you find another boy band faction, he can play it. It'll be very interesting.
That one, it just like fills my mind with so many different ready-made cards that you could play. There could be like backup dancers and going solo and all different kinds of things like that.
Stealing artists from other people.
Take control of someone else's like power 5 or whatever. Or yeah, that'd be really interesting.
Since we're going to be talking about the disco dancers, it's important to clarify what they mean by a standard action. A standard action is very simple. It's any action that is played and goes immediately to the discard pile. It's not played on a base, and it's not played on a minion. You'll see this term on a lot of the disco dancer cards.
Let's take a closer look at the disco dancers, starting off with the power 5 minion, the Dancing King. Ongoing, when a standard action directly affects one or more minions here, you may choose another minion here to be affected the same way. Diva. Ongoing. Once each turn, when a standard action directly affects one or more of your other minions here, you may choose this minion to be affected the same way. We Are Family. Play on a minion. Ongoing. Once each turn, when a standard action directly affects one or more other minions here, you may choose this minion to be affected the same way. Roller. After this minion is directly affected by a standard action, place a +1 power counter on it if it had no such counters when the action was played. Get Down Tonight. Give a minion +2 power till the end of turn. Draw a card. Disco Inferno. Each player may place a +1 power counter on one of their minions. For each minion affected by this, draw a card. Last Dance. Each player may destroy a minion they control. For each minion actually destroyed, its controller gains 1 VP. Turn the beat around. Choose a minion to gain +1 power until the end of the turn. For each minion affected by this, a minion of your choice gains -1 power until the end of your turn. Special. You may play this before a base scores. I Will Survive. Special. After a base scores, return one of your minions there to its owner's hand instead of the discard pile. It's Raining Min. Play an extra minion. Staying Alive. Choose one of your minions in play. Place a copy of it from your discard pile into your hand. Celebration. Play 2 extra actions. I'm So Excited. Move one of your minions to draw a card. Disco Loo. Play an extra action or place an action from your discard pile on top of your deck. Boogie Wonderland. After a player plays a standard action that affects one or more of their minions here, they draw a card. Funky Town. Once per turn, when your standard action directly affects one or more of your minions here, you may have it affect another one of your minions here the same way.
The Disco Dancers have a really novel idea in copying each other's abilities by playing a standard action, but it's important that you pay very careful attention to the wording. I highly advise you to look at the rulebook and read the examples that they provided so that you could use the faction correctly. The first faction I would pair with the Disco Dancers is the Dinosaurs, who have some of the strongest power-based standard actions in Smash Up. They have 2 copies of Augmentation, which will provide +4 power. If each diva were to copy this ability, in addition to the Dancing King and We Are Family, you could have a huge power surge in a simple turn.
So how else can the dinosaurs synergize with the Disco Dancers?
There's a couple of ways. So they have the Roller, which is the power 2 minion, which when they're affected by a standard action will get a +1 power counter if they didn't already have one. If you were to play a Howl, which increases the power of every minion regardless of what base they are on, every Roller would go from 2 power to 4 power, and therefore you could possibly break multiple bases in one turn. Additionally, they have a couple of means of playing additional actions through Disco Loo, great name by the way, and also the Celebration, which lets you play 2 extra actions. So you can play a power boosting action like Augmentation or Howl, and then play Rampage. You also have the ability to get some actions back and play Rampage multiple times, so that could be a game-changing action multiple times.
Now, are there any actions within dinosaurs that don't fit the standard action criteria?
Yeah, they have Wildlife Preserve, which is playing on a base, but what it does is that it prevents your actions from being affected by other people's actions.
Okay. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good fit.
But mostly they just will have extreme power boosts, and they'll have action retrieval and the ability to play additional actions, which will let you break a single base from start to finish on a single turn, especially when combined with the T-Rex. If you could pull off a combo where the T-Rex is played with an Augmentation and a Rampage, that's 22 power that you can defeat in a single turn. That's a lot.
Yeah, that would be definitely a power swing.
Sarah, what's your first combination?
My first combination is the Disco Dancers with the Dragons. The Dragons have the ability to break bases down so that the breakpoints aren't quite as high. And I thought that combined with the fairly easy movement of the Disco Dancers would make for the ability to break factions easily. You can bust down the breakpoint and then pile on a bunch of Disco Dancers.
I also think that using the same action retrieval that the Disco Dancers have, you can get some very powerful dragon actions again, like Burn Down the Walls, where you're constantly changing the base until you get one that you want.
Yeah, because you can get cards out of the discard pile very easily with the dragons. And since there are so many good cards in the Disco Dancers, it would be nice to have those come back into play.
Absolutely.
Eric, what's your first?
So the first one I thought of would be very interesting because I went with Mythic Greeks, although they have a lot of non-standard actions. But I was interested to see how it might be interpreted with some of the favor cards, such as the Favor of Dionysus, where one of your minions gets +1 till the end of turn. It would get that action, but would it get the action of play an extra action and then maybe play this card on top of your deck instead of your discard pile? That would still be in effect because that card's still playing it. It would still go back on top, and you would still have the play an extra action from the card itself, but would the standard action, like the Divas, allow you to play another action?
Well, the standard action has to affect the minion, and so to affect the minion, you either have to increase its power, return it, move it, destroy it, place it, shuffle it. So anything that actually affects the deck itself is not going to be affecting a minion.
But it'll still get the +1 power counter to the end of turn.
Right, so you could theoretically power up several minions every turn because you keep playing that card.
So what about the Favor of Hera, where it's placed 1 power counter on up to your minions?
Right.
That directly affects it. So how would that work? Could in that card, will it get 1 more power counter if it's not even the one of the 2 that you picked?
The minion would be affected in the same way. So if you gave +2 power to one minion, then the minion should get +2 power. If you got +1, then they would be affected in the same way and it would also get +1.
Okay.
At least that's my interpretation.
All right. So it has some limitations. Like it could do the Favor of Ares again. It's +3 power to end of the turn. But for the most of them, they really don't kick, and you don't really get to use the advantage of the special minion that the Greeks have, where you can play this in lieu of an action.
I actually do think there are some synergies there because there's still the action retrieval that we keep mentioning, and the Greeks have powerful actions. So any faction that has strong actions is going to pair well with the Disco Dancers. But since the Greeks also have very strong minions that compound on the actions, and the Disco Dancers encourage you to play as many actions as possible, getting back your Odysseus or your Jason or your Heracles with the card that says "I will survive," which basically bounces them back up to the hand after the base scores. You know, the great thing about the Geeks when you're playing them is that once they're gone, they're gone. But if all of a sudden that's not the case, then it's going to be a very short game.
Yeah, so I thought they have a lot of interesting mechanics that are out of the norm for your traditional faction base.
Great. Well, my next one is right up Eric's alley, and this is going to be the Tricksters. Now, this is a very advanced combination, and a couple of things have to go your way. But if you play this correctly, you could have an extremely annoying game for your opponents on your hands. So a couple of cards for the Tricksters to call out would be the Brownie. After another player plays a card that affects this minion, that player discards 2 random cards. Well, the Disco Dancers have a card called We Are Family, which says, play on a minion. Once each turn, when a standard action directly affects one or more other minions here, you may choose this minion to be affected in the same way. Notice that it doesn't say your minions, it only says here. So if another player boosts the power of their minion with an action, you could have it applied to the Brownie as well. He'll get the power, and it will affect him, so he'll have to discard 2 cards. And the Dancing King can produce the same effect. So you could just be creating a magnet for actions that affect your Brownies and causing your opponents to discard cards constantly. But my even better combination comes down to the card, which is Last Dance. Each player may destroy a minion they control. For each minion actually destroyed, its controller gains 1 VP. Imagine if you did that and you copied several abilities of the Brownie. So you use the Dancing King and you use We Are Family to supply that ability to the Brownie in addition to any divas. It's important to note that each diva can copy the same action because they're all copying the action originally. What this means is that several minions can be destroyed to gain 1 VP. You'll draw a card for each gremlin that's destroyed, and if you're lucky to pull this on Cave of Shinies, you'd get double VPs. This would be an amazing way to end the game and extremely tick off all of your opponents. What better way to end the game than with a card called Last Dance?
I do like ending the game on Keva Shinies. It's a fun way to end the game.
Right, but you could do that with basically 9 points. It's not that hard to copy it 3 times.
Yeah. That'd be a very powerful swing shift in the game.
So if you want to be like Eric and annoy people, Disco Dancing Tricksters is the way to go. Sarah, what's your second one?
My second one is Minions of Cthulhu. This one's had a couple different names. Initially, it was the Cthulhu Cultists, but it's also been the Minions of Cthulhu. Whatever you call it, I think that this would be a really fun one to pair up with the Disco Dancers. Minions of Cthulhu has a lot of actions, and it has a lot of discard retrieval, which is getting cards out of your discard pile. So combined with the movement and the lots of actions that the Disco Dancers provide, I think that this could be a really fun combination. Now, there is some madness in the Minions of Cthulhu deck, and I know that Eric said earlier that's not necessarily one of his favorite things, but I think that the madness cards can really introduce some unique and interesting new twists to the game, and I think seeing them come out with the Disco Dancers could be really cool.
There's also the card Recruit by Force, which says place any number of minions of power 3 or less from your discard pile on top of your deck so that you can keep getting your divas back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that seems to be one of the driving minions of the faction, the diva.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So that leads to my idea of, I'm going to kind of go back to the power idea that Gemini has been playing off of, but giant ants, using them to just put power counters power counters on your minions, and then just using the ants just to help power manage, to really control and manage your power counters so that you're always not really having them leave the board. You know, you could break a base and you can shift them over to another minion and just always have this pile of power counters that are just floating around the bases, breaking them up.
That would also help out the rollers who only get the power counter if they don't already have one. So using the giant ant's ability to transfer power counters around would be very useful.
Right, and then so if you have, you know, your rollers and your divas all out on different bases, they all suddenly could get what is that, like 8 points up?
Yeah, because they'd be generating the power counters that you could then later transfer.
Not to mention the original power counters that you played on whatever minion that you played it on
in order to trigger the ability.
Yeah. So, and if you have a +2, you know, power counters on stuff, you can really just jack up the power counters, which is a great way to just, you could break a couple bases at the same time, depending on how you play your cards.
So when analyzing a faction, it's also important to consider what other factions won't work with that particular faction, and that's what we've done as well. So for my first example of a faction that wouldn't work with the Disco Dancers, I have the Cyborg Apes. Now, although they're both action-based factions and the action retrieval will help, the truth is that the Cyborg Apes have no particularly powerful action, so being able to retrieve any one of them isn't going to be that useful. Maybe Flying Monkey is the closest one, and the fact that none of them are standard actions isn't going to give any boost to the divas.
So that's a very good point. That doesn't have really good synergies. The one I kind of thought of, I actually have two, and I think you're going to debate me on one of them. The first one is the Wizards. So they have a lot of great actions, but none of them actually provide power directly to a minion, and so they're pretty ineffective. The other one is the Steampunks. I was looking at them. I kind of felt like they were really good. They got some of the base or the action retrieval cards that will help, but overall they're just not really that fantastic with the divas.
I don't know. The Steampunks have some of the strongest actions in the game, like Agromotive and Rotary Slug Thrower. If you think of it as the mass movement that Sarah mentioned with the dragons, you can have a lot of power activation strategies where there's no power on the base. Then everybody moves there and all of a sudden it's an explosion of power. I think there's enough action retrieval that may work. It may not be the strongest combination, but they could hold their own against.
So I'm not sure how this would work with the Slug Thrower card, but it applies 2 power to each minion on the base. Would the divas copy that ability and have 4 power, or would they still only get the 2 power?
No, what I'm saying is you use the diva's ability to copy the move that moves everybody onto the base. because one thing you want to avoid is power creep, where everybody's adding power and then one person just overtakes. If you could activate power by not supplying any and then all of a sudden turning all of it on with a mass movement or other factor, that's what I'm talking about. So the rotary slug thrower is there on another turn. You use an action to move everybody over, so you go from 0 to 15 in a very short amount of time.
Okay, gotcha. But you could pretty much do that with like any other faction without being too powerful.
There's many ways to accomplish the same goal.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that I think they would work together.
All right. They won't actually be antithesis. It would just be
Yeah.
complementary. That makes
kind
sense.
of more the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
The final thing we do when we talk about a faction is talk about what you would use to counter it, and the Disco Dancers are no exception. So let's talk about what counters we came up for the Disco Dancers. Eric, why don't you go first?
So I came up with geeks because they could really counter anybody. I mean, just having some of those, I believe it's
Will Whedon and Force of Will.
Will Whedon, yeah, and Force of Will that prevents a card or action from being played, and then you can just take control of a card when it's played. So it's just a well-rounded basic card just to stop anybody.
Yeah, I could see that having a very particularly nasty combo. The geeks are specifically designed to counter anyone who is strongly action favored. If you were to use Control Minion on the Dancing King, because you now control it, when one standard action affects one or more minions here, the standard action being Control Minion, you could then take control of another minion and it would cascade.
Yeah.
I also think that, Will Whedon and Force of Will just instantly shut down the powerful actions of the Disco Dancers, and Rules Lawyer would transfer We Are Family to another base.
Yep.
My counter is much more straightforward, though, and it's the Spies. We don't often talk about the Spies being one of the better factions, but they are specifically designed to combat actions with the Secret Agent, who makes you discard a card every single time you play an action. If you get him on a base, the Disco Dancers would be at a severe disadvantage.
Just cause a lot of havoc.
Exactly.
So maybe if you knew that you were playing someone who was playing the Disco Dancers and you wanted to play the Spies, then you could choose a secondary faction that would allow you to draw a lot of cards, card draw, and that might help to kind of counterbalance that. But again, choosing the Spies would probably not be the best in that situation, playing against the Disco Dancers.
Well, when you choose a spy against someone that you really should not be playing against spies, they are really great at what they do. Like, Spies against Princesses completely shuts the faction down. I could see with having enough card draw, the Spies would totally shut down the Disco Dancers, or at least make their life very difficult.
Trickster Spies would be really just get rid of all their cards, just discarding away until they just hate you and they wish they were ghosts.
And then using your special at the last second.
Yeah.
With the Spies. All right. Before we get to the interview with Todd, let's have a quick word from our sponsors.
Here at Havoc, we have many family-friendly establishments such as Rhodes Plaza Mall. Make sure to invite your friends. You can find wonderful gardens like our Secret Grove, where the prices are killer and the flowers don't bite that hard. Love snorkeling? We've got a shark reef. Tired of grandma? That's why we have a retirement community. Come check out our historic ice castle that no one can actually enter, but it's a great tax write-off. And if you're really daring, come visit our Unicrave, where literally anything can happen. Havoc, have a vacation of chaos.
Welcome back. We're here with Todd Rowland, the director of AEG. Hey Todd, how's it going?
I'm doing well. How are you guys?
We're doing great, thanks.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you for taking time out. Where are you right now?
Right now we are in Okinawa, Japan.
That's great. How long are you going to be there?
We'll be here for about another week and a half.
Very cool. Well, we have a couple of questions for you. Again, we thank you for taking the time, and Sarah is going to go first.
Hey, Todd, how's it going?
Good. How are you doing, Sarah?
I'm well. Hey, I wanted to know what exactly it means to be the director of AEG.
Well, director is a title that several people have. At AEG, we tend to wear a lot of hats. In general, I direct marketing across many of the game lines, but I also do project management for Smash Up and art direction and creative direction on Smash Up and several other games. So it mainly means that we handle whatever we need to handle.
Awesome.
So you say per marketing, and you're currently traveling throughout Asia, and Smash Up has released its Big in Japan expansion.
Mhm.
Are you helping with any of the promotion over there with the expansion?
Well, I spent 3 months a while back in Tokyo, in Japan proper, the mainland, and part of that was in Tokyo, and I was able to work with ArcLight and go into their offices almost daily. And we worked on Smash Up, the Big Japan conversion, and several of our other games like Cat Lady and Custom Heroes that they were bringing to Japan. So I was able to talk to them, work with them directly on it as they are our Japanese publisher, and got a bit of their feedback on it. They got a kick out of it. They thought it was obviously a sort of a American take on Japanese stuff, and they thought that was fun too. But they were excited about it. They actually liked the fact that we did a all Japan expansion.
Very cool. So I've always been interested in how gaming differs across the world. If you look at Europe, for example, the games tend to be very economic and strategic, whereas Americans tend to be more focused on confrontation. What are some of the themes of gaming that you've seen around the world?
Well, it's interesting because being here in Japan, you see a little bit of both. They obviously enjoy Euro game styles, but then they also have a lot of direct confrontation games. You know, CCGs and TCGs are really big here still. There's new ones all the time. There's tournament scenes. And we brought another game here over to the US recently in Sakura Arms, and it's a two-player direct fight game. You also have games like Tokyo Highway, which are very Euro in nature. But one thing I've seen as I travel around, having been to Europe in previous years, and just watching gaming scene, I think that there's a lot of blending happening right now. And while there are still some strictly what you would consider a Euro game, I really believe in the next couple of years that distinction is going to almost not entirely be gone, but be really, really thin, because many of the traditionally Euro style games you see are trying to inject more theme, and even some of your more confrontational games bring in elements that could be considered Euro back in the day, and I'm not sure that there's going to be much of a difference the next couple of years.
Very cool. Thank you.
So Todd, the That 70s expansion for Smash Up, it seems to perfectly capture a caricature of the 1970s. The factions, the art style, all of that just really perfectly captures this caricature. And I was wondering, how did that come about?
So at the time we were beginning to plan the set, we were throwing out a couple of different ideas for what we could do. And I believe we were at Gamma a couple of years ago, sitting outside of the showroom, having a snack or something, and we were talking about different ideas. And one of us threw out the idea of an all 70s expansion. And I don't remember if it's me that put it out there, but I do remember it clicked with me really quickly, because one thing that people may or may not have noticed is that not all the factions, because they all have their own theme, but a number of factions already appear to be set in an era somewhere between the mid 60s and late 70s anyway. So like if you look at the time travelers, they've all got, you know, turtlenecks, their jumpsuits, and their Farrah hair. And then several of the other factions, if you look at the vampires, of course you've got the Blackula tribute, and our count is the Christopher Lee count, not the Bela Lugosi count. So much of Smash Up was already a bit of a tribute to the 70s as it was. And I don't know why that is, but it just happened. Something about that era that I've always found fun. And to do a whole set sort of took on the whole thing was really exciting. And it was really easy to see just how much could have included that we weren't able to because of limitations. because there was so much that had been in there.
I think fans will really appreciate going back to the sets where they felt like a self-contained set, like the science fiction double feature or the monster smash up, and not just these are 4 factions that will be in a given set at a time.
Right, yeah.
That kind of answers the question for what inspired the idea for that 70 expansion. But what about the particular factions within it? How did you think of like the disco dancers and all the karate? Kung Fu, I should say.
The disco dancers were the most obvious thing. When most people think of the 70s, they think of disco. Even though in doing a bit of research set, I realized disco only lasted about 2 years. And it came and went really fast, but it's to define that whole decade in people's memory. So they were a pretty clear one. Following on them, we went with the next idea were the Kung Fu fighters. Because people had wanted a martial arts group in the game for a while. And something about the 70s, chopsocky, Hong Kong wire action, Kung Fu was exactly the type of martial art I wanted to put in the game. So we went for the Kung Fu theater type of movie that you see on a Saturday afternoon repeat back when you were growing up. And we put in a lot of jokes to shows like Kung Fu, our own little grasshopper movie, and Drunken Master, and several others. And you will notice as you see more and more of the Kung Fu actions, that there is a theme running through all the titles. And most people should figure that out pretty quick, because it's another very 70s. After the next group that got proposed actually by the staff at the office was the truckers. They wanted a set that had the, Speaking of the Bandit and that type of era. So we looked at movies like Convoy and things like that, and it just sort of came together as a faction really quickly. And then lastly was one that I wanted in the game for a while, which was the Vigilantes. And again, if you go back to those movies from that era, like Death Wish and Dirty Harry, they just sort of embodied that hard-nosed vigilante street type more than just about any other era. And that's how we ended up.
Like I said, I think you guys did an incredible job capturing that caricature, because it is, you look at the factions that are included in this one and it just seems like they were obvious choices that came together really easily. Nice job with that.
Well, thank you. It was a really fun one to work on.
Were there any factions that didn't make the cut?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there always are. Everything from pet rocks, which we weren't sure what they would do, to hippies, which, more of the hippie culture was in the 70s and the 60s, but I think more people associate them with the 60s. So we chose to not include them in a 60s set.
Thank you, Todd. Jim and I had a discussion about the hippies, and you just vindicated me. Thank you. I appreciate that.
I said that they were associated with the 60s.
Yeah, but it was really the 70s.
Right or wrong, they're associated with the 60s.
Right, that's the problem. It's what's the perception that people have, because we have to bear that in too.
Okay, so I have a kind of a two-part question for you.
Okay.
The most recent expansion for Smash Up was big in Japan, and it most notably introduced the Titans, which was this powerful new type of card. And now we know that there are some plans to retroactively provide Titans for some of the existing factions, but I noticed that there's no new factions in the That 70s expansion. So my two questions are, one, will there eventually be a Titan for every faction? And two, if not, what factions can we kind of look forward to getting some Titans for? We already know about the Explorers, which is coming out in the Titans event kit in June, but maybe you could tell us about some other ones?
Oh, sure. There's several. So to answer your first question, I can't say with any certainty that there will be factions for every faction. When we began doing the Titans event, we first began by doing a survey of all the factions and see which ones may need a little boost. And could we use giving them a faction as that way to give them a little boost? And then there were a few that didn't necessarily need the boost, but the Titan itself was so awesome or funny that we had to do it. So, will every faction get one? Honestly, you never know. We might at some point, but it's not a goal. The reason that none of them in the 70s set have one, even big in Japan, is because at the time we were creating the 70s set, big in Japan had not released. So we didn't know what the reaction to the Titan was going to be yet. And in our original idea, the Titans were probably going to be a one-shot thing for big in Japan. This was supposed to be like a double play, the name big in Japan, and that they would have big giant things. But everyone seemed to like it. And a few people did, but we choose to ignore them. And the people who did like it really liked it. So to make a whole kit, we began making Titans for some old factions. And as you've seen, there is the Explorers that are getting one. The Smash Club newsletter that's coming out this month will preview another one that I'm not going to reveal which faction it is yet. But among some of the others you expect in the Titans event kit are the Vampires. Will have their own Titan. The Super Spies. And another one I can tease, it would be the Tricksters from the base set will have their own Titan. So the littlest guys in the first set will also have one of the biggest.
Very cool.
I have to be honest that, I was one of those people who was on the fence about the Titans, wondering how it would mix in with the rest of the game. But having seen the Explorers and a couple of others, I'm all in on the Titans event kit. I think it's going to be
the
great
Explorers
for the game.
One is so much fun. It's hilarious, just the way the mechanic works with what it is.
Particularly that it's a giant boulder.
Exactly. It's like the scene from UHF where it just follows him everywhere, right? He leaves the movie studio and it still chases him.
Excellent. So I'm sure the Big in Japan expansion is doing really big in Japan. But that 70 expansion is focused mainly on American culture. How does that translate? And does it have appeal in the international market?
So things like Kung Fu and Disco are definitely going to have crossover appeal because they were worldwide at the time. Now, things like the Truckers are definitely more American-centric. The Vigilantes have a little more crossover because most people know Dirty Harry, and they probably heard of Shaft, Foxy Brown, or things like that. But when we are going to do something, our general focus is to commit. And when we decided we were going to do Truckers, we knew it was going to be a primarily North American-centric theme. Not that there aren't Truckers in other countries, but the visual we went for is definitely much more American. But again, if we're going to do it, we're going to go full on. And we hope that the humor of it will translate, even if it's not as familiar.
Very cool. Thank you.
So when you first revealed the card for the Disco Dancers, I believe the first one you revealed was I Will Survive, which is an action that returns minions back to your hand. Mm-hmm. And that gave me a completely different impression of what the faction was going to end up doing. And I'm curious, when you're designing a faction, do you start with the lowest powered minion? Do you start with the highest powered minion? Do you start with an action? What is the process for actually determining how to arrange a faction?
So, from my perspective, it's a little different because Paul Peterson does most of the nuts and bolts of that, coming up with the individual abilities and things like that. From my end, I'm usually coming up with the thematic, the visual, the humor, what's the joke going to be? Now, not to say that I'm alone in that, because Paul will often adopt those jokes into the designs. So going back to the very large boulder, I knew immediately that the Titan for the Explorers would be the very large boulder. And I had suggested it should follow minions around from base to base. And then Paul took that and made the mechanic. And when we come up with a set like that 70s, the interesting thing about 70s was that we came up with the factions together, but then I personally had almost no input on the mechanic. Paul took them and went off and came up with mechanics for them and put it all together at the same time that I took the art ideas and went off and made all the art. And so it's a collaborative effort. Nothing that happens in Smash Up is any one person's accomplishment, I should say. Or we're always trying to work the team between Paul, Brian Stout, myself, Callie. We all make the whole thing come together.
That's kind of cool. It fits in with the smash up mechanic, is that we smash up the cards, we smash up the ideas. I like it. Okay, so Todd, just one more question for me. What are the current plans to promote Smash Up for this upcoming year?
Oh, well, we have a lot planned. So let's see, starting from the most, actually say the soonest to happen, at Gamma, the industry trade show, Smash Up is going to have its own separate booth area. It's part of the AEG booth. It's sort of enclosed into itself, where when the retailer comes in to see the new stuff, which will be that 70s, a little preview of the Oops, You Did It Again expansion and the Titans, they'll be stepping into a all Smash Up area. They'll be surrounded by full-size illustrations of different characters, things like that. So we're going to be promoting it really heavy at retail again. And then when that 70s comes out, we're going to be doing a big, online promotion to that. Of course, we're already doing the previews of that nature. Later on in the year, we'll have the Titans event kit. And the Titans event kit will be out in June. And we'll be promoting that through retail. And we have one other big surprise during the summer that we can't announce just yet, but you'll probably hear about it in the next 2 to 3 weeks from when this is broadcast. And then later in the year, we'll have the Oops, Did It Again expansion. And that will introduce the factions that the fans themselves chose. And then we're also going to have a lot going on because we're going to smash the newsletter that we want everybody to sign up for. We will have a way for people who get the All-Stars last year a chance to get it so that they can current on all their collection. We're going to be doing a lot of fun and silly stuff. We're going to be setting up a calendar of Smash Up holidays this year. You'll start to see those begin probably in March will be the first ones. So we'll want everybody to celebrate online all these different holidays that are important to Smash Up and its characters, and a lot of other types of stories.
Awesome. It sounds really fun.
Excellent. So is there a surprise country where Smash Up is particularly popular that you really wouldn't expect?
And the places that I've been, I will say that Germany still surprises me because, you think of Germany as being this hub of Euro gaming, right? That everything's going to be little wooden cubes and, farms and stuff like that. But Smash Up has always done really well in Europe, and they are working on their edition of Oops right now. And it continues to roll on there. So it's real happy it as well as it has.
I have one last question, and this is the same one that Eric asked each of us as an introduction. In honor of the Titans event kit that will be released later this year, if you were a Titan for an existing faction, which faction would it be, and what would be your ability?
Oh, well, okay. It would have to be the Geeks, probably. That would probably be the one it would have to be, not necessarily the one I would want it to be.
That's the way I felt too. I picked the Geeks for mine, and I felt exactly the same way.
The ability would probably be to errata cards on the fly. Just create new abilities for them as they played. Now, if it could be anyone that I want, it would probably be Super Spies. Because then I could wear a tuxedo.
Yes.
And that would be the card ability. Go rent a tuxedo right now to gain plus 50 power on this. It is funny. I will tell you, there is one Titan that requires a minor action outside of normal play of the game in order to
I
play
like that.
which is
I
pretty
like
fun.
that. I'm excited to learn more about that.
Yeah. Now, we're not talking about any crazy, like, glued or unhinged type stuff where you have to throw cards across the room. But, you know, there's something funny you have to do for one of the Titans.
You'd be like Shazam.
Something like that.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Todd. We look forward to an exciting year of Smash Up.
Oh, well, thank you all for having me. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, and have a safe trip.
Thanks.
Thanks, Todd. Hey Minions, I'm Jim Price, and this is the Breakpoint, the show where we talk all about Smash Up bases. Today, I'm going to be talking about ninja bases, which are not just the bases that come with that faction, but any base that falls into the pattern where second place is mathematically more advantageous than first place. Out of over 100 bases in Smash Up, as of that 70s expansion, there are only 4 bases that fit this criteria, and those are Ninja Dojo, Temple of Goju, the Portal Room, and Winter Squashed. Among these bases, the Portal Room will stand out because it still provides an extra turn to the player who wins, so maybe even though you get 1 less points, it's still advantageous to win that base. Winter Squash is also unique because it provides 4 points rather than 3. And sadly, I can confirm that no bases in that 70s expansion will have this type of distribution, and I think that's something that Smash Up needs to improve in the near term. One of the most powerful cards, in fact, in my opinion, the most powerful card in Smash Up, is Terraforming, the alien action that lets you swap any base in play with the base from the deck. This will let you turn an advantage into a super advantage or a disadvantage into an advantage, and a large part of Terraforming's power comes from its ability to pull a ninja-style base. If you're losing on a base badly to another player where they've used a lot of their minions, imagine the ability to turn that base into a base that rewards second place more than first, and win the base technically by having 3 points in second place with only 1 or 2 minions. This will really turn the game around and provides a lot of power to ninja-style bases. As far as minions are concerned, Felicia Day is the best minion at breaking these, because it will move all minions to this base, regardless of the person who play them. Your minions, all of your opponent's minions, the minion may not be affected by this and they'll stay on the base, but that's pretty rare. For the most part, every minion will move to the same base. So if ninja bases are so powerful and they can completely turn the game around for Smash Up, why aren't there more of them? As I said, in over 100 bases, there are only 4, 3 if you don't count the Portal Room, which may still be more advantageous. I think the primary reason for that is a very simple question. If second place is more valuable, why would you bother playing your minions on them? You wouldn't be trying to win the base at that point. And I think there's a couple ways we can get around that. The first of them is what I call mass movement, the ability to move other players' minions to a different base. In Smash Up, there are a couple of factions that excel at this. The Barrel Cavalry and the Tornadoes come to mind. To a lesser extent, the Sheep and the Pirates also do this well. What this means is that you can let other people play their minions on whatever base they want, and then you can use your mass movement cards to send them to the ninja style base and use their strength against them. Cards like Shanghai, which will move another minion to a base, or Sea Dogs, which will move all of a faction to a base, can be very powerful. The Tornadoes have the ability to swap minions on bases, or just move generic minions, and the Barrel Cavalry can move people to bases, not just to destroy them, but for a ninja-style base, can make use of their power and make first place be a little bit of a trap. It's kind of surprising, in light of that none of these factions actually have a base that benefits from it. In fact, it's surprising that the ninjas, instead of the pirates, have the bases that reward second places, since there's not a lot that the ninjas can really do in order to take advantage of these bases. Probably the best example is letting someone break the base by themselves and then throwing a shinobi on at the last second for a cheap 3 points. But then again, you'd have to be asking yourself, why are people playing their minions on the first place? Several bases will provide good incentives for playing minions there. Perhaps you can offer a player card draw, or placing power counters on their minions, or recycling minions from their discard pile. I think players may want to place a couple of minions on there in order to get a good ability if it helps them in the long term. This is where you can enable people to surprise another player. Some factions that do this particularly well would include the Elves. The Elves have a number of cards that will give power to other players' minions that works really well on a ninja style base. The Elf Health Guru, for example, will give 1 power to every other player's minions on this base. Helping Hands excels because it lets you take a victory point from a player on a base where you were not the winner. Imagine a 2-3-2 split becoming a 1-4-2 split. This would be devastatingly good for the Elves. They could have used a base like that. Pumping Iron is another card where you get to supply power at the last second to a minion. The Astronauts have a particularly interesting card, Block the Probe, which will give +2 power to any minion and can be played before a base scores. Augmentation of the Dinosaurs will provide +4 power to any minion, and in the base set, I've used that to finish off a ninja base and really surprise people, since contrary to what you would expect, the power does not have to go to your minion, it can in fact go to any minion. Another base that stands out is Unicrave. This 19-point base is unique because it has 0, 0, and 0, and unlike Rhodes Plaza Mall, where you score 1 point for every minion you have on there, Unicrave doesn't actually score itself. Instead, it gets replaced by the top card of the base deck, and you continue scoring that way. If most of the bases are a 5-3-2 split, or a 4-2-1, or even a 4-3-2, it doesn't really matter what base comes out, because you're going to get the most points for winning. If you win Unicrave, you're probably winning the other base as well. But if there were more of a chance that the base that came out wasn't going to be good, players would think twice about playing that base. It would give more power to a faction such as the Explorers, which lets you control what base is going to come out next. The final thing we can do is actually have bases provide movement actions themselves. One of my favorite bases is Mushroom Kingdom, which is a 5-3-2 base. Unfortunately, that should have been a ninja base in my opinion, because of its ability. The ability says that you can pull another player's minions to this base at the start of the turn. Imagine what this would look like on a ninja style base. It would be devastating, because any good minion played on a different base would be pulled like a magnet over to Mushroom Kingdom. The bases tend to not repeat abilities, but maybe this would be a good opportunity for an exception, or maybe change the wording so that it's unique, but still mostly the same. The idea of a magnet style base where you can lure other people's minions to that, and then surprise them and get second place, that would be very valuable to Smash Up. There are a lot of great bases in Smash Up, and much of the replayability comes from the bases that are in the set. I really believe that the replayability can be enhanced by adding more ninja style bases, and I'd like to see Smash Up do that in the future. Maybe we'll see it in Oops We Did It Again, because unfortunately, it won't be in that 70s expansion. I'm Jim Price, and this was The Breakpoint.
Hey, I'm Sarah, and today I'm here with another entry into the files of Dr. Wynn. Before the game we know and love came into existence as Smash Up, it was simply called Panzer, P-N-Z-R. The working title came from the first 4 factions created: the Pirates, Ninjas, Zombies, and Robots. Paul Peterson, the creator of the game, got together with friends Ed Bolme, Todd Rowland, and John Zinzer, and they playtested the game all weekend. The cards were handwritten on little slips of paper using different colored markers, and initially, each player controlled only one faction. At some point, one of the players suggested smashing up 2 factions, and the rest is history.
Hi, I'm Eric. One of the things I love about Smash Up is the theme and all the variations the factions can create. Smash Up posted on the Facebook page Smash Posting about creating a soundtrack for factions' favorite songs and bands. And that reminded me of something my friends and I would love to do when playing Smash Up. Once we decided on our factions, we would try to figure out what movie that combined faction set would create. For example, if you had time-traveling robots, you would have the movie Terminator. Since this episode is all about That 70 expansion, let's take a look at the disco dancers. Naturally, movies like Saturday Night Fever and Grease come up to the top of the list, featuring Dancing King John Travolta. But that's just the factions by itself. Let's take a look at some interesting pairings. If you add Miskatonic University, you have Step Up, featuring Channing Tatum. You could say that he used that movie to step up into the big leagues. Another interesting pairing is Astronauts, which makes Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, as long as you ignore everything in the middle. which leaves you the dancing slaves in Jabba the Hutt's palace, and the Ewok dance party. And no, I'm not going to talk about episode 1 or any annoying aliens. Let's just say mistakes were made. Looking at you, George. Last but not least is Super Spies, creating awesome powers and gold member. Get your groove on by taking it down to Funky Town. If you can think of any fun results from pairing disco dancers, please leave a comment below. This has been Smash Up Mashup.
Well, that's our show. Thank you, everyone, for watching.
Join us next time for a preview of another expansion faction from the That 70s expansion, the Kung Fu Fighters, and an interview with Paul Peterson, the creator of Smash Up.
Be sure to comment, like, and subscribe.
Until next time, I'm Jim Price.
I'm Sarah Traeger.
And I'm Eric.
Let's shut it down.
I'm like too far away from the mic to where I can actually like sit back in the chair, so I've been sitting forward the whole time.
Yeah, I've been kind of like hunched over, like I'm.
It doesn't look as bad for you guys. Maybe just like a primal man, you know, like all hunched over.
It looks like we're flexing. But you don't see like my Buddha belly like just pushing out.
Let us fix you some. The L is for lithium. Yum yum.
So, the question with rotary, I don't think this is how it would work, but rotary.
Rotary slug thrower.
So I don't think this is how it works, but rotary slug thrower.
Rotary slug thrower. It's not that hard.
It is for me, apparently. So
for my first pairing, I'm going to pair the disco dancers with the dinosaurs.
all right. So what are the key elements that you think that dinosaurs bring to the table to help the disco dancers roar to life?
Can I start over? Sorry.
No, because I said a pun.
I just like that one though.
Let's take a look at some interesting pairings. If you add Miskatonic University, you have Step Up, featuring Channing Tatum. Channing Tatum. Channing Tatum. Channing Tatum. Channing Tatum.
I'm laughing at you pulling Channing Tatum into the
Let's take a look at some interesting pairings. If you add Miskatonic University, you have Step Up, featuring Channing Tatum. Channing Tatum. Channing Tatum. Channing Tatum. You gotta do it in front of the computer.